Hi, and welcome to the Master of Applied Leadership in Positive Education. I'm Dr. Vicente Reyes, and I am here to guide you as you go through this research section of Unit 501, Becoming a Positive Leader. In this research section, we will pursue one very specific question. What do I know about positive leadership? In order to answer this question, we believe that exposing you to research skills is imperative. The research skill we'd like you to be familiar with is the skill of evaluation. We will accomplish this by going through the rudiments of educational research. In this research section, I invite you to critically engage with the subject matter in order for you to continue your learning journey under MALPI. Thank you. By the end of this session, you should be able to define educational research, identify the importance of educational research, name problems with research today, describe the research process, identify ethical considerations in conducting research, and reflect on the skills you bring to the research process. Why do research? Research helps you comprehend real-world puzzles. It allows you to pursue your interests in a context where certifications are a must. Having research competency is a premium. Is this statement acceptable, questionable, valid? Research helps you understand events happening around you. Also helps you to undertake effective, efficient, and efficacious problem solving. Research also allows you to make a substantive contribution to knowledge. Why do research? Personally, one of the motivations I have for undertaking research is to try to contribute towards solving real world puzzles. A real world puzzle that confronts us today in Australia is the great Australian education divide. What I mean by this is the great disparity between education outcomes of metropolitan students on the one hand and regional, rural, and remote students on the other. In the mid 90s, I undertook research in Spain. And in my research during that time, one of the things that I sort of unearthed or discovered was the phenomenon of sekema, a Spanish phrase that means burnout. Up till today, I still undertake research towards discovering and preventing burnout. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the other type of research that I undertook was looking at networks of reform. I did research on this in an Australian, in an American, and in a Philippine context. The puzzle that I wanted to try to contribute to in solving was how do education reform networks function in the midst of a highly politicized society. Most recently, the research that I've been undertaking has been trying to look for ways to mitigate corruption that happens in the education sector. This research is really focused on developing world contexts, particularly the Philippines and in Indonesia. What is research? One way to answer this question would be to take a look at what the researcher actually does. In the effort of undertaking research, Three main actions that researchers do would be firstly, to ask a fundamental question. Secondly, the researcher collects data. And, of course, the researcher indicates how the data collected helps in answering the question. How do we define research? Research can be defined as a process of steps used to collect and analyze information in order to increase our understanding of a topic or issue. For example, we may want to find out student achievement. This could be the issue that we are trying to discover, and a question that might direct our efforts at undertaking research could be, what are the factors that determine student achievement? The importance of research. There are various reasons that point out to the importance of research. Let's take a look at one of these reasons. Research adds to our knowledge. Research is able to help us by addressing gaps in knowledge. It also helps us expand our knowledge. With research, we are able to replicate knowledge. And more importantly, research is able to add voices of individuals to the pursuit of knowledge. Going back to the research question that I gave us an example earlier, what are the factors that determine student achievement? We could actually gain more knowledge if we take a look at what I would describe as student level factors: the student's gender, race, student background, family background. We could also expand our knowledge if we take a look at that same question and consider school level factors: teacher, the classroom, the impact of school budgets, the impact of school equipment. Our knowledge could actually even be more expanded if we looked at the interaction of student and school level factors. Is there an interaction between these two levels of factors as we try to determine student achievement? What is another importance of research? Another reason that we could identify is that research helps improve practice. Educators gain new ideas for their job as these ideas are influenced by evidence generated from research. Educators also gain new insights into approaches. Research helps educators connect with other educators. Going back to that example that I mentioned earlier, what are the factors that determine student achievement? Looking at that question and undertaking research helps improve our practice in various ways. If we take a look at student level factors, a question that we might ask is, what are the implications to the practice of student level factors? What is the impact of using the mother tongue, for example? If we take a look at school level factors, we could ask the question, what are the implications to school practices? Some of the things that we see in different parts of the world would be streaming. Does this improve teaching practice? Does it improve school practices? With research, we're able to provide evidence that hopefully improves our practices. Another importance of research is that it helps inform policy debates. Research allows people to weigh different perspectives on issues. Research also enables people to make informed decisions regarding policy. looking at the example that I raised earlier, what are the factors that determine student achievement, we could actually take a look at how research informs policy debates. If we take a look at student level factors, a question that we may be able to explore with research could be, what is the impact of existing policies? A policy that is existing now in different parts of the world would be school vouchers. Debates about this particular policy could be enriched by evidence generated from research. If we take a look at school level factors, some research questions that can be explored could be, what kind of policy interventions are necessary in the school? Worldwide, perhaps the most used policy would be government funding. With research, we could actually attempt to measure the impact of government funding on schools. What are some problems associated with research today? There are several that have arisen. First, we could encounter contradictory or vague findings. When we take a look at research, questionable data is one of the biggest problems that plagues the research environment and all research efforts that we see in various places. Unclear statements about the intent of the study is another problem associated with research. Lack of full disclosure of the data collection procedure, in other words, a lack of transparency in how data was obtained, also diminishes and most often provide or raise problems with research. Finally, an inarticulate rendering of the research problem is a lingering issue that is associated with research. What is the process of research? The process of research can actually be seen as a six-step process. The first step is identification of the research problem. This is followed by a review of the literature. This is then followed by the specification of a research purpose. Collecting data comes after that. The analysis and the interpretation of data is the penultimate step. And finally, reporting and evaluating research. These would be the different steps in the process of research. Let's take a look at the first step in the process of research, identification of the research problem. In this first step, we need to remember that there are three essential sub-steps that comprise it. First, the specification of a problem, followed by a justification of the problem. The third sub-step here would be a need to state an argument stating the significance of the problem for the different types of audiences who might be interested in looking at the problem that the researcher has raised. The second step in the process of research is reviewing the literature. Let's take a look at some of the important steps in undertaking a literature review. The first step, of course, is locating the resources. Conventionally, the sources for research would be books, journals, and, of course, electronic resources. The next step after locating the resources would be selecting the resources. In selecting resources, two considerations need to be made. One, the researcher needs to determine the relevant resources for the topic, for the question being explored. And in selecting the resources, researchers would be served well if they organize their resources by developing something like a literature map. And the third step in literature review preparation would be to summarize the resources in an organized literature review manner. The third step in the process of research would be the specification of a research purpose. In this particular step, we need to take note of two important components. First is the need to explicitly identify the purpose statement. Some of the problems that people encounter in undertaking research projects is a lack of explicit stating of what the purpose statement is. In identifying an explicit purpose statement, we need to also clearly set aside and identify what the major intent of the study is. There's also a need for researchers to identify the participants who are involved in the study. And an important component would be also to identify the site of the study. The other component that is also absolutely vital in the specification of a research purpose would be narrowing the purpose statement. If we take a look at quantitative type researchers, the narrowing of the purpose statement is described as writing the research questions and including hypothesis statements. For qualitative purpose statements, qualitative research purpose statements, what is essential would be the identification of a central phenomenon and the enumeration of sub-questions related to the central phenomenon. Let's take a look at the factors that determine student achievement, the example that I raised earlier. If we would be undertaking a quantitative research approach, the kinds of specification of research purposes we would identify would be mean scores of student achievement, for example, the NAPLAN, controlling for student and school level factors. If we were undertaking a qualitative research approach, we would be looking at nuances in classroom subcultures that promote or impede student achievement. For example, notions of student voice and teacher talk. The fourth step in the research process is collecting the data. In the data collecting process, there are 5 components that researchers need to take note of. Firstly, researchers need to determine the data collection method that would be employed. Secondly, it is important for researchers to identify the individuals who would be studied. Individuals can also be considered as the respondents who would be studied. Thirdly, researchers need to design the data collection instruments and also outline the data collection procedures that would be employed. The fourth section of collecting data is absolutely important, and that would be obtaining permissions from those who would be participating in the research undertaking. The fifth and final component would, of course, be gathering the data itself. The fifth step in the research process is the analysis and interpretation of data. In this particular step of the process, there are 3 components that we need to take into careful account. Firstly, in analyzing the data, researchers take the data apart to look at individual responses. This analytical portion is followed by the second component, which is representing the data in tables, in figures, in images, and pictures. The third component in analyzing and interpreting data would be to try to derive explanations, conclusions from the data that directly address the research questions. The final step in the research process is reporting and evaluating research. In this final step, there are 2 components that need to be remembered. First is reporting research. In this step of the research process, three ideas need to be remembered. First, researchers need to determine who the audience is for the report. Secondly, careful attention must be given to the structure of the report itself. And thirdly, the report has to be written sensitively. In other words, it should be non offensive, it should be objective, and more importantly, it has to be written accurately. The other step of reporting and evaluating research will, of course, be the evaluation component. In this particular step, it is important to assess the quality of the research using recognized standards in a discipline. If someone is writing a report for people in the area of political science, for example, which is my area of training, we need to be able to satisfy standards within the discipline of political science. Right? Each discipline would have their own standards, but a common standard that permeates various disciplines would be transparency, accuracy, and of course, the two fundamental precepts of research, which is reliability and validity. Finally, the standards that come from the academic community, school districts, federal or state agencies should also be taken in careful consideration in the reporting and evaluation of research. It is absolutely vital for people undertaking research to remember ethical considerations that are an important and vital component of research. There are three things we need to remember when we talk about ethical considerations in research. First is the absolute need to respect the rights of the participants. We need to obtain their consent, and if participants at any moment during the research process decide to back away from the undertaking, they are entitled to do so. The second consideration in research would be to honor the requests and restrictions that researchers encounter when they approach a particular research site. And finally, it is important that the research be reported fully and honestly. Now that we have an idea of what the process of research is, what could be some skills that are needed for people who want to undertake research? There are four that come to mind almost very quickly. First would be the curiosity to solve puzzles. This is very important for people who want to embrace research careers or even to undertake a small research project. Secondly, those who want to undertake research need to have the skill of paying attention for long periods. A long attention span is vital. Of course, it goes without saying that those who want to do research need to have adequate library and computer resource skills. Finally, in order for research to be communicated accurately, ethically, it is important that researchers have writing and editing skills. At this point of this research section of this particular unit, I invite you to take a look at this reading that I am suggesting you spend time in analyzing and digesting. This is an article written by Fassarelli in 2008. The title is Flying Partially Blind, School Leaders' Use of Research in Decision Making, published in the Phi Delta Kappan. I invite you to read this particular article, and one of the questions you to look at and to reflect upon is this: are educational leaders research averse? Another question that I'd like you to consider and reflect upon as you read this article about school leaders' use of research would be this point. Describe some barriers that you have encountered or witnessed. You may have experienced this vicariously that you believe has impeded research being used in educational decision making. The third idea or point that I'd like you to carefully consider as you read this article would be this question. Have you ever participated or heard about action research before? If so, what are your impressions of this approach? After reading this article by Fossarelli about school leaders' use of research in decision making, I invite you to work with your group mates or one of your colleagues undertaking the program and consider these four questions. Number one, is there a need for educational leaders to be researchers? Secondly, what does the future hold for leaders in an educational environment that embraces the research culture? Thirdly, how does research help leaders execute better decision making? And finally, how can research findings be applied to my organization? As we end this research section of Unit 501, I'm inviting you to undertake personal reflection. And these are some questions that I invite you to consider. First, based on what I have learned so far, what question would I like to focus on as a topic of my action research project? Why do I choose this topic? What are the expected limitations that I will encounter if I choose to write about this particular topic? The second question for reflection that I invite you to undertake would be this one. In relation to the proposed action research project that I am about to undertake, what is my plan? Where do I begin? What are my parameters? Where do I get my sources? When do I actually do research? What do I research?